Hello and welcome, everyone. Good to have you here. Before we begin, let me ask you something. What would you do if you walked into the most famous house in the world, the very symbol of American democracy and presidential power, and decided it was not good enough? What if you ripped out its history, gilded its walls, demolished entire wings, and then stood in its most beautiful garden and called it a profanity in front of a room full of guests? That is exactly what is happening right now at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. And the story goes far deeper than a shocking word. It goes to the heart of who Donald Trump is, what he wants the world to see when they look at the White House, and what he is willing to spend or have taxpayers spend to make that vision real. Stay with us because what we are about to reveal will change the way you look at the most powerful address on earth. And right now, before we go any further, if you value fearless, in-depth storytelling like this, please take 1 second to subscribe to this channel and hit that like button. It keeps this work alive and helps us bring you more of it. Now, let the story begin. It was a warm Monday evening in May of 2026. The newly renovated rose garden at the White House glittered under soft lighting. The stone was freshly laid. The columns were polished. The air carried the weight of ceremony and occasion. Gathered before President Donald Trump, now 79 years old and deep into his second term, stood a crowd of law enforcement officers. They had come to the White House as part of Police Week to be honored, to be recognized, to share in a moment of presidential dignity inside one of the most storied buildings on the planet. And then Donald Trump opened his mouth and everything changed. He began, as he often does, with a story about his wife. First Lady Melania Trump, he told the crowd with a grin, had pulled him aside before the event and given him a very specific instruction. Act presidential. She had told him, do not use foul language. Trump repeated her words slowly, savoring them, building a moment. He gestured at the gleaming garden around him, at the new stone he had insisted he paid for himself, at the freshly plastered walls and polished columns. And then, without a hint of shame, he told the assembled officers that if he were being perfectly honest, if he were not being restrained by his wife's advice, for he would have normally called this place something very different, he would have called it, he said, a cess house. He caught himself at the last possible syllable, or pretended to, and added that he did not want to say that. Not tonight, not here. The crowd laughed. Some were visibly shocked, but the moment had already happened. The President of the United States had just applied a barnyard profanity to the White House, the very building he was standing inside, the very building generations of presidents had walked with reverence. And he had done it with a smile on his face. Now, you might be tempted to write this off as another Trump moment, another headline, another controversy, and then on to the next one. But do not go anywhere yet, because the reason he said what he said, the reason he felt comfortable saying it, the reason he has spent millions transforming this building from the ground up is a story that starts long before that Monday evening in May. And it leads somewhere that most Americans have not yet fully reckoned with. When Donald Trump returned to the White House in January of 2025 for his second term, he did not walk in as a man content to inherit what was there. He walked in as a man who had already decided that the building was not worthy of him, or perhaps more accurately, not yet worthy of the vision he had for it. Within weeks, the renovations began. And they were the Oval Office. The most famous room in the most powerful building in the world was transformed. Gold was added, more gold than the room had ever contained in its entire 200-year history. Decorations that critics were quick to describe as gaudy, as ostentatious, as more befitting a Las Vegas hotel lobby than the seat of American executive power, filled the shelves and surfaces that had once displayed quiet, historical dignity. Observers who were given access described an interior that felt less like the Oval Office and more like Trump's private club in Palm Beach, Florida, Mar-a-Lago transplanted to Pennsylvania Avenue. But wait, because the Oval Office is just a beginning. And what comes next is the part of this story that should make every American stop and think very carefully. The Lincoln bathroom, a modest, dignified space that had existed in green and white tones since the era of Abraham Lincoln himself, was gutted. What replaced it was something entirely different. Reporters and officials who toured the renovation described a space transformed into a marble monstrosity. Gold fixtures, ornate surfaces, the kind of interior design that belongs in a luxury resort, not in a room that carries the name of the man who preserved the Union and ended slavery. And yet there it is, gleaming and immovable, deep inside the White House. Trump stood before his Rose Garden guests and boasted about all of it. He talked about the columns that had been falling down, the plaster that had been falling off, the walls that had been in horrible shape. He said the White House has got to look incredible. It has got to be pristine. And then he said something that revealed exactly what kind of pristine he had in mind. He began talking about his ballroom. And when Donald Trump talks about his ballroom, something shifts in his voice. It becomes something close to rapture. The ballroom in question is being built in the back of the White House, or rather, it is being built where the east wing of the White House used to stand. We will come back to that detail in a moment, because it is one of the most significant facts in this entire story. But first, let Trump describe it in his own words, because the words matter. He told his guests that this ballroom would be, and he used these exact words, the most beautiful ballroom anywhere in the world, that no one would ever see anything like it, that it would also be very safe with glass of extraordinary thickness built to the highest level of safety. And there, tucked inside the glamour and the boasting, is the pivot, because Trump was not just talking about beauty, he was talking about security. And the reason he was talking about security on that particular evening connects to one of the most jarring events of the year, an event that would change the entire political and financial landscape of this renovation project overnight. In late April of 2026, a shooting took place at the White House Correspondents Association dinner, held as it traditionally is at the Washington Hilton in Washington, D.C. Someone opened fire. The event descended into chaos. People were hurt. And before the night was even over, Donald Trump and his allies had begun doing something that stunned even seasoned political observers. They began using the shooting as a justification for the ballroom. Trump told reporters directly that the Washington Hilton was not a particularly secure building. He said this was precisely why the White House ballroom project was so important. It would be larger. It would be more secure. It would have bulletproof glass. It would never allow a situation like the one that unfolded at the correspondents' dinner. The message was clear, even if it made many people deeply uncomfortable. The tragedy of a shooting had become a selling point for a vanity construction project. And now here's where the numbers become impossible to ignore. When the White House ballroom project was first announced, the initial estimate for its cost was $200 million. Trump insisted from the start that it would be privately funded, paid for entirely through private donations with no burden to American taxpayers. He repeated this assurance publicly multiple times to multiple audiences. The cost has now more than doubled. The project is currently expected to reach $400 million. And here is the part that should cause every viewer to sit up a little straighter. Despite Trump's repeated pledges of private funding, Republicans in Congress are now seeking $1 billion in taxpayer money to fund what they are calling security adjustments and upgrades connected to the project. $1 billion from the public treasury for a project that was promised again and again to cost the public nothing. The White House's own spokesperson explained the request in part by citing the shooting at the correspondents' dinner as one of the driving reasons why the Secret Service needs additional resources to, in their words, fully and completely harden the White House complex. So the same tragedy that Trump used to promote the ballroom to his Rose Garden guests is now being used by his allies in Congress to justify sending $1 billion of taxpayer money toward a project Trump said would never touch taxpayer money. But even that is not the whole picture. Because beneath the demolished East Wing, beneath the ground where the historic East Wing of the White House once stood, something else is being built. Something that was not announced with fanfare. Something that the administration has described only in the vaguest terms. A defensive bunker. A new underground facility that will replace a World War II-era bunker originally constructed by President Franklin D. Roosevelt. The scope of what is being excavated beneath the White House grounds is not fully known to the public. What is known is that the entire East Wing has been demolished to make room for it and for the ballroom above it. Think about that for a moment. The East Wing of the White House, a historic section of the building that housed staff offices that connected to the larger White House complex that was part of the physical fabric of American presidential history, is gone. Not renovated, not restored, demolished, and in its place a ballroom and a bunker are rising. And Trump is not stopping at the White House itself. His transformation of Washington as a whole has been systematic and, to many observers, deeply personal. He has added a presidential walk of fame to the West Wing colonnade, a gallery of portraits of past presidents, now accompanied by new plaques, a kind of presidential hall of fame installed inside the very corridors of power. He has hung banners featuring his own face on government buildings across Washington, D.C. He has added his name to the facade of the Kennedy Center, one of the most beloved cultural institutions in the American capital. He has added his name to the facade of the Institute for Peace. And then there is the arch. Donald Trump has unveiled plans for a 250-foot triumphal arch to be constructed at Memorial Circle, a traffic roundabout near Arlington National Cemetery, where America's war dead are buried. Survey work for the arch began in Washington in May of 2026. And on the same weekend that survey teams were measuring and mapping the ground where it will stand, Trump took to social media to boast that his magnificent ballroom was under construction and ahead of schedule. Magnificent ballroom. Those words are worth sitting with for a moment. So this is how a sitting American president is choosing to describe a construction project inside the White House. Not a necessary expansion not a security upgrade, a magnificent ballroom. And it is coming at a cost, financial, historical, and symbolic, that the country is only beginning to fully absorb. There's also the matter of the statues. Trump has installed new marble statues of founding fathers around the White House, and the rollout has not been without embarrassment. In one widely reported incident, the White House unveiled what it described as a statue of Thomas Jefferson, only to have observers point out that the statue actually depicted Alexander Hamilton. The White House was quietly humiliated. The statue remained to stand back and look at all of this together. The gold Oval Office, the marble bathroom, the demolished East Wing, the $400 million ballroom, the secret bunker, the billion-dollar taxpayer-esque, the presidential walk of fame, the banners, the arch, the renamed buildings, is to see something that goes far beyond renovation. It is a rebranding, a systematic effort to stamp one man's aesthetic, one man's name, one man's vision of grandeur onto the physical structures of American government and history. And it all comes back to that Monday evening in May, to the Rose Garden, to the gleaming new stone, to the polished columns, to a president standing in front of law enforcement officers, invoking his wife's warning about presidential language, and then using a profanity to describe the most famous house in America. Normally, he said he would have called it a S house, but of course he said it anyway. He always does. And that perhaps is the most revealing detail of all. The warning about the language, the pause, the pretense of restraint, and then the word delivered with a grin. It is the same dynamic playing out in the bricks of the marble and the gold of the bulldozers. The acknowledgement that norms exist, that traditions have weight, that history matters, followed immediately by the decision to bulldoze all of it and build something bigger, shinier, and bearing his name. The White House has survived wars, fires, political crises, and 2 centuries of American history. It has been home to presidents in moments of triumph and moments of devastating failure. It has been a symbol not of any one man, but of the republic itself. What it will look like when Donald Trump is finished with it, and what that transformation will mean for every American who ever looked at that building and felt something, is a question that history is only beginning to answer. But the ballroom is going up. The bunker is going down. The arch is being measured. And the most famous house in the world has been called, by the man who lives in it, something that cannot be reprinted in a family publication. That is where we are. And where we go from here. That is the story still being written. Thank you so much for watching. If this documentary gave you something to think about, please share it with someone who needs to see it. Subscribe to this channel for more investigations like this one. And leave a comment below telling us what you think is really driving all of this. We read every single one. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and never stop asking questions.